Hello everyone, today we talk about the Battle of Formigny, fought on April the 15th, 1450. This is one of the major battles of the 100 Years' War between England and France, and this battle has a substantial significance because from a strategical point of view it brought de facto to the destruction of the last English army in Normandy, and therefore paved the way to the French for the capture of the remaining English strongholds in Normandy. And today we will make a tactical history. This is chiefly a tactics video about how the development of the battle. Fundamentally, we will give some background note, but we will not concentrate specifically on the strategical theater at the moment. However, it's still also an interesting battle from a tactical point of view for several reasons that now we will see during the description. So, at this point, where do we start? Well, the French under King Charles VII had taken their own time that after the Treaty of Tours of 1444. And managed to reorganize and reinvigorate their armies after the truce. The English now, having this kind of weak leadership of King Henry VI, were fundamentally in trouble because their presence in Normandy had been weakened. The truce was brought to an end by the French in June 1449, and the English strongholds in Normandy were very much depleted and weakened, etc. Some important some centers English centers had fallen, like Pont-Audemer, Pont-l'Evêque, and Lisieux. In 1449, in the August of it, and therefore much of Normandy was retaken by the French during the following autumn. So cutting north and east, the Bureau brothers oversaw the capture of Rouen that happened in 1449. You know that Rouen was one of the main centers of Normandy. Harfleur fell in December 1449, and Honfleur and Fresnoy in January 1450. And the next move was now to invade Caen actually, for the French. So the English at this point gather a somewhat kind of small army, right? That they're able to summon during the winter of 1449, and this army counted roughly 3,400 men. So nothing huge, but still something consistent could make some strategic difference. This army was dispatched from Portsmouth through Schwerpunkt and put under the command of Sir Thomas Kyriel. That is this important figure. He was an English soldier of the 100 Years' War, and also participating to the opening of the Wars of the Roses. Eventually, he was executed after the Second Battle of St. Albans, and he had a remarkable curriculum. He was a battle-hardened veteran. He had served under Henry V. In Normandy, and he had hold in 1436 the fortress of Les Crotois in Picardy. Then eventually he served under Lord Talbot, and around Rouen, and in 1443 he was created Knight Banneret. And it was, in fact, to lead now the English forces in 1450 into the Battle of Formigny. there is also later history that is kind of interesting, but now we don't have time to. Let's stick to this. The English army landed in France on March the 15th, 1450, so just one month before the battle, and it was reinforced actually by the Duke of Somerset, Edmund Beaufort, that was also the Lieutenant General of Normandy, that had gathered into Normandy proper these forces drawn from the Norman garrisons under this other battle-hardened soldier, Sir Matthew Gough, or Gough, I believe it's pronounced. And there were also other elements like Sir Robert de Vere and Sir Henry Norbury, etc. So at this point, Kirill led the English army south, and he laid siege to Boulogne, which basically blocked Schwerpunkt from the rest of the Cotentin Peninsula, and the town fell on March the 27th, after this brief siege, as you understand. And at this point, Kirill continued his advance towards the French-held Carentan. At this point, we are at the beginning of April, closer to the battle, when basically the English army managed to encircle Carentan on April the 12th, and at this point the French still declined to sally, although they were harassing the English army through skirmishes, small skirmishes, etc. And at this point, Kirill turns east and goes towards Bayeux, reaching this village of Formigny on April the 14th. And at this point, the French decide to exploit the situation because, by the way, there is, as we'll see from the map, there is a river fording. At this point, it's a kind of an interesting position. The French move with two armies at once, and this is kind of one of the characteristics of this battle, that it's effectively being fought between these two French and one English army, and the size, as we will see, was seemingly pretty even. Even though there is some debate about this, it's not really clear. We will analyze that later. And the first army, seemingly of 3,000, let's say apparently 3,000 men, plus at least 2 guns and some local infantry, was led by Jean de Bourbon, who was Count of Clermont, and he was advancing east of Carentan to intercept at this point the English force, right? And on the same day, another French force of mainly of Breton cavalry, roughly between 1,200 and 2,000 Breton cavalry, was joining. Perhaps actually less. We know, however, was arriving from the south. This army was led by Arthur de Richmond. These were kind of. He was also another veteran. He was also very cautious, very thoughtful, and the numbers here are a bit disputed, because we know that Richmond had between 200 and 300 lances at the time. So given that at this time the men per lance were normally 4, we can say that there were 800 / 1,200 men, not just only cavalry, but chiefly the core of the army was made of cavalry, plus seemingly 800 archers as well. Many of them actually also mounted, right? So Clermont was to arrive upon the English first. Looking at these two figures, this was, as we have seen, one of the John II, Duke of Bourbon, was sometimes referred to as John the Good, and the scourge of the English, was the son of Charles I of Bourbon and Agnes of Burgundy, and he was Duke of Bourbon and Auvergne from 1456 to his death. And his nickname derived naturally from the efforts to drive out the English from France. And at this time he was rather young, right? He was 24, so he had still a lot to prove, but still was in command of this as a major French nobleman of this force, while the other French commander, as we have seen, Arthur de Richmond, was a much more experienced leader. He would be actually also Duke of Brittany from 1357 to his death, that occurred the year after. At this time he was 57, so he was a grizzled veteran. At this point, he had this fame for having been an effective military leader during the 100 Years' War, and although he actually sided briefly with the English at a point, but remaining eventually loyal, committed to the House of Valois, and he fought alongside Jean of Arc. He was appointed eventually Constable of France, so this was basically the first officer of the French crown, one of the original five great officers of the crown of France, and commander-in-chief of the king's army. So he was theoretically the lieutenant general to the king, and therefore theoretically he outranked by prestige at least all the nobles of the realm. So, and therefore was considered as second in command only to the King of France himself. And he actually the name of Richmond. He is actually it was inherited through the English title of Earl of Richmond, that was held previously by the Dukes of Brittany, but his tenure was actually never recognized by the English crown. And he has this very interesting record of military activities. Now we can't really tell it all, but you can look it up. It's pretty impressive. He was definitely deeply involved also into the major political affairs of the kingdom at this point. He had fought at the Battle of Agincourt, as a matter of fact, on October the 15th, 1415. He also fought alongside Joan of Arc during her victory at the Battle of Patay on June the 18th, 1429. And now he was he joined several. It was all about war fundamentally. He also participated to several sieges, like the one of Poissy in 1432, etc., etc. This was just a bit about the character. So looking at the battle at this point, looking at numbers, we have fundamentally already outlined how many troops chiefly the French had. There is much debate chiefly on the English army at this point. A historian like Ferdinand Lot said that the English outnumbered not just Clermont's army that, as we will see, engaged the English army at the beginning of the battle alone, but also the sum of Clermont's and Richmond armies all together. So this was historiographically the original idea that basically the English army was pretty big, and it even was even superior numerically speaking to both the French armies combined. This was a mostly, I think, French influenced idea. Today there has been a shift in the sense it's looking more carefully at English chroniclers and considering the overall thing that many historians say that it's kind of strange, or if not impossible in some measure, that the English were so many and that they got defeated. Naturally, this is, I said, a kind of a more English influenced perspective. In my opinion, probably the difference of the in numerical terms of the two French armies combined and the English one probably wasn't that great. It's still possible, in my opinion, that the English were really numerically superior. At this time, perhaps with the Kyril's forces brought from England and the Norman forces summoned by the Duke of Somerset as governor of English-held Normandy could number altogether something like 4,500 men, including 800 men at arms that were the bulk fundamentally of all armies at this point, with several. The rest were fundamentally English archers. So there was this, if you want, traditional composition of the English force at this point. And half of this army as we've seen, had come from England. With Kyril, the other Norman reinforcements were kind of 1900 under. Actually, at this point, commanded by in this battle proper by Sir Matthew Gough, the one Gough that we have mentioned before. So the Duke of Somerset was not present actually. So it was basically Kyril and Gough that led the English army at this point. So we actually have even the numbers seemingly of the individual garrisons of the Norman castles that had been stripped to form the army. Seemingly 800 from Bayeux, 600 from Vire, and 500 from Caen. The French, as we've seen, were instead altogether a force of let's say between 4,600 and 5,000. So it's possible they were actually superior to the English, and it's fairly positive. But the problem is that we don't really know, and this is one of the things we don't know. But it's very likely that actually the size of the armies were pretty much the same. What is interesting though is that from the way the battle developed, and this can lead to further considerations of the strengths involved, the French were committed, first of all, only with the initial 3,000 men under Clermont, while the others arrived later during the battle, seemingly after actually several hours that the battle had started. So this was the main problem of the numbers, that we don't really know, and obviously it's a problem also for the same interpretation of the battle. The English at this point knew of Clermont's arrival, and they were stationed in this area close to the village of Formigny. So what the English do is basically at this point is to hold a very strong defensive position, to keeping this pretty big at this point advantage. This was kind of traditional, as we've seen or better, it wasn't much traditional in itself, but in many battles of the Hundred Years' War, you know that the English fundamentally were outnumbered, and they were to mostly defend. Most of the time, speaking about battles of like Crécy or Azincourt, that obviously are the most famous ones. Which at that point there weren't many options on what to do if you are in such strong numerical inferiority, which is also relative because the accounts are never quite precise or nor kind of agreeing with each other. But the idea is that you have to defend strongly, and in order to defend, you have to dismount your men-at-arms, to entrench in some way, and to hope for the best. And the English, with their well-known, let's say, longbow tactics that are kind of, let's say, longbow and men-at-arms combined. This is still a combined tactics. The men-at-arms of the English armies of the Hundred Years' War are a bit neglected into the role that they had, because they were actually the ones that physically stopped or that, however, engaged more directly the French cavalry once they arrive at the head of their lines, and effectively protecting the longbowmen when they were doing what they used to do. So the English at this point do some at Formigny do something similar. They basically entrench, and it's interesting because it seems that the English didn't know that Richmond army was to arrive. They knew it was around, of course, but they didn't expect in the moment they took up position at Formigny that basically the Richmond would have joined the battle on that day. This is particularly important because we will see that during the battle the English will try to solve this problem in a way that basically shattered eventually their formation, brought to the disaster, but it's reasonable. By the way, the same Clermont didn't actually probably hope that Richmond would have arrived in time. He surely learned that before the English, but it was uncertain for a great part of the day, and the initial clash that was started for Formigny actually saw this overall English advantage represented by the very strong defensive position. There is, however, seemingly some surprise that the same English had for the same arrival of Clermont, because Kyriel had already taken position around Formigny, and Gough instead had yet to arrive. So Kyriel called him and telling him to hurry up from the road to Bayeux, and therefore it seems that suggests that in fact Clermont was arriving from the west now faster than the English had previously had expected in some way. And during all this time, the English, before the arrival of Clermont, the English keep fortifying. They erect field fortifications. They basically worked to this all the morning long, and there were these fortifications consisted in large potholes and ditches, and the English naturally excavated in the front of their position, also planting sharpened stakes in the ground. And this was kind of typical, as you know, of the French armies of the English armies of the time, chiefly for what eventually these fortifications had to be employed tactically, like in coordination with the in order to they're actually always a good idea, but they were very important to maximize the effects of the longbow / men-at-arms combined tactics. This area was, and this is often overlooked in many, in the narrative of many ancient, kind of every battles in histories, that these were not only flat. These battlefields were not really only flat grounds, but they were also inhabited. So there were buildings, and around this, it was full of villages. Unfortunately, we don't really know what the area looked like, topographically speaking. Let's say we don't really know which villages were where, so we kind of don't know. But we know that the English were exploiting at this point the local walls, edges, gardens, and orchards, by also strengthening them. And this was naturally and chiefly a useful measure against the French cavalry that was dreaded, as you know, as basically the best cavalry in Europe. And at this point, the English also strengthened their position in the east of Formigny. If you look from the map, chiefly, if you look at how the English were deployed, basically they drew up this a sort of convex line straddling the Carentan-Bayeux road, crossing here, and this was a very good position, because there were thick orchards and stream to their back, so there were the English in large part were protected from that side, and also on the right. This position was of the main line, let's say, was made up with archers arranged in 3 bodies of 700 roughly. So they had this roughly 2,000, more than 2,000 archers, with billmen and dismounted men at arms in between them and slightly behind them. So this was a kind of a was definitely not a new formation. This idea of putting the archers in a slightly advanced position and having this kind of melee infantry instead slightly behind on the line, because the idea was basically to make the enemy pour into against the melee infantry by defending the archer positions with sharpened stakes, etc., and also making them kind of more archers could theoretically draw back kind of more easy, say retreat and move more easily, be more dynamic in this sense. So attacking also in this entrenched positions where they were shooting from was not really the best idea, and therefore also hitting them from the flanks while they were hitting the enemy from the flanks while they were attacking the melee infantry. And this was the bulk of the English army, and it seemingly was also on the left a smaller detachment, seemingly composed partly of cavalry that was placed a bit away on the left. It was relatively isolated actually, and we will see that this brought partially to even some problems to the English to protect this flank, and was commanded by Gough on the left. Gough was closer to the stream, by the way. The stream was known as Val, if I'm not wrong. This is a small tributary of the river Or that flows actually in the south of Formigny, and that would be crossed by Richmond army. Well, he was heading towards Formigny to attack the English, in fact. And at this point, most of the English army, including the archers, was dismounted, and this is natural because of the defensive position that they had taken. Many people assume that, the fact of English army fighting on foot, I made a video about this incidentally, was kind of a default tactic, but it is not really like that. Most of these troops were mounted, actually. The English were also famous for their chevauchés in France, having this very great strategical mobility because of their mounted troops, etc. And they had usually both men at arms and archers mounted on horseback, actually. So this idea that since in these main battles the English fought mainly on foot, it's the idea that the English fought on foot. This is absolutely wrong. It's not because they were English or because they had this tactics preferentially employed. Of course, it was the defensive situation that brought them to fight in that way. Because otherwise, if you really look at how France and England were in terms of material, culture, technology, they were pretty much the same. So it's not that the English kind of went beyond the intrinsic value of the strength and mobility of cavalry for trading it for infantry formations, like as if no other army at the time did anything like that. It was forced by those particular conditions, even in here. So these troops were dismounted, but they were also perfectly capable of fighting on horseback, archers included. Actually, at this point, we will see that both from this very battle, but also most of during the 100 Years' War, both the English and the French made rather extensive use of horse archers, actually. So nothing exotic or Eastern-like. This was what humans do when you have a horse, when you have bows, and and when you want to do certain things. And it's seemingly the only part of the English army that had a greater amount of mounted troops was in fact Gauss cavalry on the and that was left to guard the left. That I forgot to say was also meant to defend the bridge across the Val stream, right? So this was important because also in there actually cavalry could intervene. They were deployed on the flank, so that the flank positions are subjected to this kind of higher dynamism to exploit situation. It was, I don't know whether it was partly deployed in there for some, maybe from some flank attack, but it seems like more like a sort of contained amount of elite troops, men at arms, to defend the bridge that was critical for for the crossing, obviously, etc. So and if you look at the map, actually, however, it seems that Gauss' men were deployed in part on both sides of the road, and were for this reason the seemingly, at least among the first ones to be engaged. So the French of Clermont arrived shortly after midday, and part of their vanguard was composed by the Scottish Compagnie under Cunningham. So that this time the French made use of Scottish troops, some of them also fighting with longbows at the same time, and therefore using this let's say natural enemy of the English to also replicate partly their tactics, sometimes not with immense success, but still obtaining this increased firepower after this. Bowmen, it's on especially in let's say both in open field but also in siege warfare, etc. And these were naturally great troops for skirmishing, as you understand, and that's why also partly they were mounted just like in the English armies, because they were exceptional for both exploring and scouting, etc. But fighting still maintaining a certain distance and therefore harassing the enemy with his arrows, etc. What horse archers do best fundamentally, combining speed and lethality on distance through missile power. At this point, the English scouts that had been sent forth withdrew, because they recognized this was the main of the French army of Clermont, and they fell back. And Clermont's men at this point advance up to the Val stream, actually, although stopping beyond the range of English archers, because at this point the French had a pretty good grasp of what it meant to fall into the range of the English longbowmen, and the two sides actually remained for seemingly another 3 hours observing each other. This is important. So the thing went on for quite a substantial time. This is naturally important because before launching an attack or taking any action, you have to assess naturally what the enemy is about at this point. And after this time, Clermont sends some gunners forward, accompanying them by two culverins, two light cannons, to bombard at this point Gough's men. And these gunners were also protected by some dismounted archers at this point, and something like 50/16 lances of men-at-arms. So this is kind of a imagine for how it really was on the field. Like it's normal to send out these detachments that contain in themselves kind of they're kind of a small army in miniature, if you want. They can respond to several tactical threats consisting of, as we've seen, gunners, dismounted archers, men-at-arms, and cannons. So at this point the French command was pretty much undecided on what to do, because the wiser and older commanders were advising to refrain for the attacks, for attacking, because they had probably recognized at this point that the English position was pretty solid. Possibly they obviously they had managed at this point to realize also how many the English were, and seemingly, as we've seen before, Kyriel's army now was larger than the singular French army of Clermont. And however, there were these younger French officers that instead commanders that wanted to attack at all costs. There was a lot of emphasis in French military ethos into this, let's attack, and that's what had effectively brought in during the 100 Years' War to some of the greatest disasters. And this was important because the French army at this point was led by aristocrats. Of course, but they were great aristocrats. They had a huge political and cultural burden. They had always to compete, to prove their strength, their courage, their honor. So the idea of just staying there was considered to be not French. The French wanted to attack at all cost for their own pride and fame, etc. Even at the cost, in fact, of risking their lives. Now, at this point, the French naturally had been bit substantially enough to understand, at least among the wisest commanders, that at least this one was not a good situation to force the hand and to attack without care. There was also another element to consider, though, in favor of those who instead claimed that it would have been better to haste the attack, which was the fortification of the English army. It was growing, because in the meanwhile the English were keeping to work at their defenses, so they were strengthening themselves, and therefore the more time passed, and the more difficult it would have become to assault them, and more costly at least. From the English side, things were kind of also not much better, in the sense that this detachment that Clermont sent forward started to bombard the English ranks with the culverins. So at this point, it's like the English were idling in defense, representing an easy target for the guns. As we've seen, also, there were pretty many. So at this time, these were just 2 guns, and we know that I made several videos on Schwerpunkt about the 15th century artillery, and we know that this wasn't a great deal of effective overall. But still, when you have so many troops concentrated in one point, and even if the accuracy of these guns sucked, and it also took a freaking long time to reload, etc., the cannonballs hit somewhere, and they were causing casualties to the English. So at this point, something between 500 and 600 archers are sent from Gau's detachment to attack the French detachment. Now, it seems that this English attack of the English archers wasn't authorized. As a matter of fact, it was spontaneous, and these things happen. When you have several men under your command, and there is this let's say autonomous dimension of warfare in some ways. You see these guys gunning you, and this archers decided to attack French artillery. So the English crossed the bridge at this point in this number of 500, 600, and managed to drive off the French gunners and those who were protecting them. And not only, but they seemingly seized the two French cannons and began to tote them to the back to the English side. So they basically went assaulting and stealing the French cannons. By the way, one thing about this battle is fascinating is that these cannons were movable, so they represent one of the first employment of mobile field artillery in European warfare. What happened is that the French do not stay there to watch their cannons being stolen, and a unit of French men-at-arms is sent to take the cannons back, not to make them be driven away by the English. So there is this struggle that begins for the control of these two cannons. And at this point, this is important because it's drawing other fighters into there. Kirill sends other men to reinforce the archers fighting against the French. And seemingly at this point a full-scale offensive could break out, but the English don't do it because and there is an account actually from one of the same commanders of an English army that says that at this point, in fact, the English should have mounted this large-scale attack, and they didn't. But and if they had done that, they would have won the day, because probably the French were too few to push the English away, and even at that point it would have been defeated. And when Richmond's army would have arrived, it probably would have now had to face still a larger English force. So it would have been pretty convenient, possibly, but we don't really know. As you know, we don't even know how many the English really were. So you understand that it becomes difficult, and this is just a drop in the sea. Like, yeah, okay, we have the source claiming this, and surely it's not unlikely that this source was saying something realistic, but and definitely it's a plausible statement, but we don't really know what the situation was, how many men were effectively engaged at this point, how things were faring, what was the reconnaissance on the battlefield, etc. So at this point, Clermont was upset because he was probably recognizing that the English were now engaging a full-scale battle, or at least there was the risk that this could escalate pretty quickly. So he went actually some local peasantry to send for Richmond somewhere in the south. So at this point, Richmond was seemingly crossing the river Or, and by this time the battle had already been going on for several hours, and there is this traditional story that Richmond climbed to the slope towards the plateau, and he arrayed his army for battle, and mounted climbed over a windmill to see what was going on from the height, and the English, we don't really know. They surely had observers scattered around, but we don't they didn't quite realize what was going on. Actually, there is a story that says that for some reason that we don't know, actually, that initially the French scouts communicated to the English army that now English reinforcements were arriving from the south when they spotted Richmond's army. So we actually have, I think, no information whatsoever about other English forces in the surroundings. But this seemingly happened as, at least it was a possibility that some other troops would arrive. At least this was seemingly what the English thought, but they soon, however, understood by recognizing the French banners that not only that was a French army, but that basically they were running the pretty substantial risk of being outflanked at that time. Because as you see from the map, the French were arriving from the south and the southeast, fundamentally, slightly. So it was a pretty dangerous situation. Probably Clermont was aware of Richmond arrival before the English were. Albeit it seems that this didn't happen in two very different times, two very distant times, because the commitment of his troops seems to have suggested he was now about to engage in a fight all along the line, because the things were really escalating quickly around that bridge, and in order to for maintaining control of those guns and retaking them from the English, let's say. So at this point, what really happened starts to be even more confused. The English seemingly were managing to defeat the French efforts to retake the guns, but the odds were reversed when there was a detachment of French men-at-arms on foot, by the way, that were sent in and managed to regain the guns. So it's interesting, by the way, that at this point the men-at-arms were dismounted in order to carry out this operation. We don't know really why. Probably because they, I don't know, maybe they were a more compact formation that could withstand also better other assaults. Definitely, this action was taking place across a bridge, so not really the best ground for cavalry, whether you're fighting on the bridge proper or on the stream. So, however, these guys managed to retake the guns and bringing them back, and seemingly in this clash, some 200 Englishmen were killed, and the others pushed back. So this was a minor but kind of bloody engagement. So the English now were panicking because they realized that they were being taken into a grip from both sides. Kirill at this point orders to redeploy his army in a formation that could desperately contain both French armies at a time. So he basically carried out this operation that is not easy. This maneuver that is not easy at all, to wheel his army, his left wing actually, more than 90 degrees in order to defend the village of Formigny. So this is clear. The front line with Clermont was towards the west. Richmond was approaching from the southeast. So basically, the English left flank had to wheel of more than 90 degrees in order to meet the second French army. And this was a particularly complex operation because you don't change formation so easily. There is this idea that formation is something so flexible, you can do whatever you want with that, but it's not really like that. Every formation is built with a logic that also entails a reliance of all the elements on that particular deployment in a way or in another. And definitely there is some flexibility. Even this maneuver was probably carried out in some order, some fashion, with some effectiveness. By the way, the commanders were pretty skilled in many ways. So the battle at this point grows kind of more chaotic because of this maneuver, especially for the English, naturally. So at this point, this maneuver was kind of overly daring in some way. I mean, there was probably not much the English could do at this point either, but it also you have to think of when haste kicks in. It's pretty difficult to, and this is fueled by fear, by natural apprehension about what is going to happen, because and this overcomplicates what is already very complicated to do. Now, Kirill was a competent commander, but the situation was pretty serious at this point. And at this point, the troops of Richmond arrive in contact with one of Clermont. Richmond sends his advance guard and mounted archers actually against the English at the bridge across the Val. The bridge, after some fight, was taken by the Bretons, that made a massacre of their English opponents, and what is interesting now is that the two French armies are in contact. So the English are in pretty serious situation, because not only these enemies arrive from both sides, but now they are even in contact with each other, so they can definitely communicate, but also they can join their forts. So still part of fencing them off from all sides was part of the strategy overall. And the situation was not easy, not even for the French at this point, because the whole deployment of the English was not completely known to them. They didn't know what was going on into the heart of the English formation, because they knew effectively that in the area that there were many fortifications now that the English had built. So they were worried that in spite of the reconnection of their the sum of their forces, they would have not been able to drive the English away from their positions. And naturally there was a lot of studying of what was going on, and especially the Richmond was however a bit more cold-blooded at this point. It had made a kind of a rational assessment, because other commanders in the French army were saying, we don't know in fact whether the English are abandoning their works, especially considering that they had been working on them for so long. So it would have been, especially in this situation where they were desperately now fearing an attack, that those fortifications are really the first thing you want to fall back on. But it seemingly was Richmond that was pushing for the attack, and managed to convince Clermont to launch this general assault at the English positions, and therefore joining making the two French armies to attack at the same time their enemy. And the English at this point were instead far from having made kind of a good move, because the English now were redeploying again, and they were starting to think to retreat actually towards Bayeux. So they were thinking to move northeast, and they were pretty much discomforted, as you can think. Excuse me, I drink a little. and some French scouts basically realized what was going on, and the idea was now to press on them, right? But still, this would have been to really commit all the French effort into once, and probably the situation was not clear. This was a problem really of recognition that is fundamental when you want to make a move, because as we have seen, the acknowledging the real amount of the enemy forces is something very complicated, and when you eventually advance, is that there are not many options to reverse that. Oh, sorry, give me time to fall back. Now attacking meant that the battle had to be decided, and at this point, even the wise and expert Richmond was a little hesitating, because he realized that a full commitment now could be potentially also very, very risky. But the same Richmond, observing the increasingly disorganized state of the English, agreed to launch the attack, and this attack was probably something that repaid at least way more than the expectations who effectively led it, because the English, seeing that both French armies were attacking, basically panicked, and they lost their cohesion. Carriel at this point tried to rally his men to defend at least the position of Formigny, but the French pressed on, and they overran the village partly. And at this point, the situation was pretty disastrous, really, for the English. They were basically butchered down. They tried to, some of them, the interesting fact is that the local peasantry began to rebel against the English oppressors and joining the slaughter in the process. So there was some sacks, let's say, of resistance, especially close to the bridge. And some of them took refuge in the local gardens, in these kind of fortified positions. They threw sometimes their weapons away when they saw that there was nothing they could do. They begged for mercy on their knees, but they were slaughtered. In Gulf, and this mostly happened to the main English bloc, Gulf, and that's why effectively Carriel was captured, because he was in there. Gulf instead managed to gather some troops, especially on horseback, and fled to Bayeux, so saving himself. Other English detachments took other directions. And there is a part of this battle that is seemingly is sometimes pictured. I think I used even one of those images, the one in which you see a French cavalry pouring into this English infantry line that is very well ordered, but I think it's a very realistic. I mean, the drawing is kind of very well made, artistically speaking, but I don't think really things happened like that. Definitely, Richmond army was the one that led, let's say, the most impacting attack, even though because they were mostly cavalry, and that's what cavalry does fundamentally, attacking and overriding. No, what hell am I saying? excuse me, overwhelm the enemy. Yeah, that's what overcome the enemy with their sheer power of the charge. And we've seen that instead the yeah, and there is this episode, but in my opinion, probably when the charge occurred, the English were already pretty much disintegrating as a formation, and that's why. And that's how it happens really most battles. You don't actually have a moment in which the formation fundamentally crashes the other, I mean, by physically entering into it, like as if it was like a smashing into it. When most of the attacks are led when the enemy is already wavering, and for which it's enough to attack, to basically dissolve their resistance. As we've seen, some Englishmen kept fighting, but they mostly did it around certain fortifications or around the bridge, and not really as actually a solid line like we see in the drawing. Naturally, and especially how it is represented in the drawing, because surely there was at the point some French cavalry charging into an infantry line, an English infantry line. But what you see in here is the in the picture the French cavalry attacking from the very rear, the English infantry line. And these guys are not even watching back what's going on, and they're seemingly marching ahead, by the way. And there are just a bunch of archers and crossbowmen throwing at them, and that's pretty much it. So it's pretty strange, and I don't think this is very realistic. Probably the situation was already much more confused than what is shown in here. Whatever it happened like, however. It's obvious that the English formation had been sensibly weakened before the charge and was already giving way. The same Kirill had apparently ordered to retreat at that point to Formigny. And therefore that cohesion, that compactness was kind of already lost. It was probably a desperate decision, because when you know that the enemy is here, they weren't actually saying, okay, let's simply retreat. No, they were thinking to actually move to Formigny and to stop there and to possibly sustain the assault, which is kind of, I don't really know whether it's true or not, whether it was just a desperate move, because we don't know when the collapse factually happened. It's very confused battle in this sense. So I've read actually several interpretations of it. Seemingly the accounts are not very, at least I've read several interpretations of this battle, and they're all a bit diverging the one from the other, but it's pretty dramatic in any way, in strictly militarily logical terms, to have an army that is supposedly at least the size of your enemies combined, and deciding while you're attacked by both to move. I mean, you have entrenched yourself so well, you've dig up everything. So this is, by the way, one of the reasons why some English, some scholars actually believe that the English were not so numerically superior to the French, because unless you're not really trapped, unless you don't have any chance to do it, because still, if you don't move away, you don't abandon your position while you're being charged. It's kind of the worst thing to do ever. This might be partly, if not justified, at least motivated by the fact that now that the French were overwhelmingly strong, and that they had probably demonstrated also their effectiveness in this fight. In fact, this battle is to be considered chiefly, not really as a pitched battle, as you understand it, something a bit more composite. and also the fact that probably both sides didn't have such a good an understanding of and and information about the enemy's strength and state is meaningful in the sense that increases the factors of chaos and of kind of irrational decisions in some way, based on that famous calculation that we talk about from Clausewitz, when you don't effectively know what's going on. And so you understand that even that before the very end, not even the French realized how messed up was the situation among within the English army itself, and how much the English had grown nervous and were panicking effectively. So it's kind of interesting. You may wonder, if the English had resisted, had not been moving in there, whether the assault would have taken place fairly. Because even if let's assume that numbers were kind of equal, right? Let's assume that more or less the French and the English, both French armies and the English one were the same size from one side to the other. Still, in order to assault a fortified position, you have to spend a solid amount of energy. So what happening here was something that probably had to do not much with the willingness to defend, but this order that was given to redeploy, that probably really messed up the situation because it confused, it created chaos, it struck fear. Because just imagine you have deployed for a battle and you don't effectively know that there is an enemy that can arrive at your rear, and this suddenly happens. When you see your commander that is moving all these troops all together to redeploy on the left flank with a maneuver that is incredibly complex, is probably already or also carried out in haste, etc., you start freaking out. It's pretty normal in some ways. By the way, I think we also don't know really what was going on the side of Clermont. In terms of that fight along the stream and on the bridge for the cannons, whether it had been settled or not. The French men at arms, as we have seen, managed to take the cannons, but we don't really know whether the troops were still engaged. So think about the confusion. Think about also the possible the possible disorganization now that after the confusion following this fight that seemingly had not gone well for the English, that had suffered substantial losses. So it's all factors that you have to take into account. In terms of losses, now the losses have been the French claimed very few losses. Actually, most of the sources the numbers we have are from the French side. The French side stresses that the French lost very few troops, and that the English lost something like a very precise number, something like 3,773 killed. Now, this is a very high toll. It's probably unrealistic in the sense that, as we have seen, the English have been literally butchered down, but it's still pretty, unusual and also inconvenient for many reasons. At least most of the times, that of a whole force of possibly 4,500, you basically slaughter something like, in fact, like a 3/4 of it, right? Or even more, actually. Probably were many, most of them were really captured, not slaughtered, but we don't really know. Probably losses were lower. Probably were something around 2,000, right? It's a credible number. Probably also the French lost some troops, especially in the first engagement, the one when the archers managed to seize the French culverins. and this is probably a more realistic assessment. Anyway, this was a crushing defeat for the English, as you understood. And why is this battle important? Tactic. I mean, what can we learn from its tactical development? Well, there is one character of it that is kind of more strategical than tactical, and it has to do with that it's not very rare, especially in medieval warfare, especially in Europe, that is the capacity of two separate armies, like the French ones that were also not very large, as we have seen, to actually linking up while a fighting was actually taking place. So and that even in this situation they managed to coordinate their actions. We have seen that not just the French took the English into a grip, but they also managed to link up, so that basically in the southwestern corner of the battlefield, the two armies managed to even unite, basically, and we've seen that the respective commanders made it through to even speak the one with the other. There is a beautiful painting here by Graham Turner, I believe, that illustrates that, and to decide together what action, in fact, what had to be done at that point. So of course, yeah, the bulk of the two armies remained attached, but still the commands were in contact and decided to attack, and also decided, by the way, to make this joint action. I mean, it's difficult, even at a sort of a relational level, to find two commanders that effectively agree, but probably at this point the young age of Clermont didn't make him lose his mind, and he listened to the more expert Richmond about what had to be taken. And albeit we've seen that also Richmond had some doubts eventually about launching the final attack. And another, let's say, interesting aspect of this is obviously the episode of the cannons, that in itself it's not so strange. Actually, such things happened all the time, especially in siege warfare. But it probably reveals the kind of more the uncontrollable dimension of certain things that were happening on these battlefields, even with such relatively small, relatively contained armies. Meaning that a detachment of even 500-600 English archers could simply and seemingly without order launch themselves to attack the French artillery. That we don't know how far it was, but it was seen as an effective action, and that a fight could in fact be lightened up simply by this completely seemingly at least completely autonomous action. The other aspect of this battle, perhaps is the most important we have discussed more at large, is the psychological dimension of the whole thing. I mean, we have seen that nor the French nor the English at this point were particularly overconfident about their action. The French spent a lot of time before deciding what to do. Clermont arrived and waited for 3 hours before starting the fight, very timidly, let's say, trying not to make the English assault. Richmond arrived, manages to fight this. He manages actually to break through the stream and to connect with the rest of the French army, but not even at this point he is completely sure about whether to attack or not. This speaks naturally also for the importance of field fortifications in battles like this, especially during the 15th century. I mean, the 15th century was probably, and still, especially at this time, in a moment of great, I can't say immobilism, but there was definitely a tendency to defensivism, much more than there had been. This is, I think, it's typical of battles of the second half of the 14th and the first half of the 15th century, for reasons that now we can't fully explain, but have to do partially with the available resources now in the European armies, also their composition. These were pretty heavy armies that were starting to become substantially cumbersome. Just think, this time there is this exploit of especially of armored troops. You find plate armor, brigandines everywhere. This is effectively one of the heaviest. This is probably the moment in history where you find it the most armored troops in absolute terms, and the degree of armor protection extended. So even the logistical problems, etc. But it's it's a moment in history where there's a lot of increasing of field fortifications, of ditches, of exploiting the and as we've seen, this fight is not a fully pitched battle. It was fought among farms, among villages, and gardens, orchards, and so on. So in the stream, so all elements that could be exploited. And the movements of these two armies were relatively small. Well, in part, naturally, it's due to the same size of the army that doesn't have this immense. It's obvious that larger armies also try to find certain, more open fields where to maneuver better. This was not the case. So I don't know whether it's correct or not historical, but I imagine this battle as this battlefield, especially as very hidden, where there was not this huge visibility or understanding of the whole picture, right? And this partly justifies what went on. Probably the English had a better grasp of what was going on overall, and that's this probably matches the general idea of retreating in some way. The fact that effectively the skilled English commanders decided to leave and trying probably to hoping at least that the French would not follow, would not push. So this might have happened effectively because they were hidden, they were concealed. And in fact, you see that what the French, because there is a source that reports the discussions of the French commanders at this point, and in fact they didn't quite know what to do at that point, and they were uncertain about what the English were up to and how much they were, and if they were so strong. In fact, the English in reality were moving away simply, but it's still also pretty foggy overall, historically speaking, to reconstruct. What about other aspects in terms of strictly combat and tactics? Well, we find in terms of the English, we find this aggressivism of the English archers. It's interesting, because it proves that English archers weren't battling just, light infantry without any, just to keep away from combat. These guys were able to in fact assault the enemy positions. They were guarded seemingly, as we've seen, also by knights. How they did it also in here, I don't know whether it's historically correct or not, but probably were supported by someone else, because if they were equipped, at least in the traditional way, it's not that you want to send archers literally against men-at-arms, but this is also a matter of masses. It's not just a matter of equipment or of what we have seen that detachment was of 500, 600 men, right? And that when they were pushed them, and they managed to assault this artillery and started pulling it back. So I found that very interesting, because it it seems that there was a kind of autonomy probably left to these archers tactically, probably for the same position, advanced position that these troops had. I mean, from one side we can stress definitely the importance of the protection of the English archers during this phase and their entrenchment, etc. But still, we should not forget they made up most actually of English armies. At this time, that, as we have seen, they still outnumbered heavily the men at arms. So these were to be understood not really as elite troops in the sense of I don't know, the young men of the guard. Well, that was really elite. These were kind of thousands of archers that could be used in the sense even as skirmishers, even as assault troops, and there is a tactical dynamism that we can't see just with great difficulty, for which these troops could be equipped sometimes even for attacking. I mean, there would be nothing strange at this point to see that some of these archers were even very heavily armored, or that there were troops among them that could follow even in that sense to be a sort of an assault troop, right? And this is a bit what these troops were, because in spite of their kind of missile nature, skirmish nature, they still were kind of assault engineers. I mean, the light archers at this point could dig their own ditches, could put their sharpened poles to defend themselves. So they had even the skill and ability to exploit such field fortifications, to probably time, being especially on the first line, to time the moments for the right moment for assault, and then exploiting their speed and stuff like that. What is interesting also about the initial English deployment is that it kind of looked typical of the other, the most famous battles of the 100 Years' War, which would suggest that, as we have seen, that the English absolutely didn't expect to be attacked from the rear, so that they just wanted to stop the French advance, or to prevent it in some way, with the usual methods. That, in fact, we've seen the French were clever not to at not baiting at it, because they stopped at the same a safe distance from the English longbowmen, and they just studied the situation and tried to dislodge them with, or at least to harass them with those two cannons. Dislodge them is too much. Two culverins could not dislodge an army of, even just an army of not even 4,000. Passing, in fact, to the French side, this is also interesting. The use of artillery to harass the enemy. So probably not just to. I don't think the sources literally tell us that this artillery was used for smashing enemies, for enemy fortifications. I think this was really used. This is for just trying to kill someone proper, or to at least disorder them. It's kind of difficult now, because we're still not in a phase where artillery is used in a pit, let's say in open ground, to literally disorganize the whole enemy formation. We're not yet in those moments in which artillery was surgically used to hit thick masses of men on a large scale, because artillery was too few on the field, it was too inaccurate, etc. But here it's not really. It's probably preferably for still destroying things like walls or buildings where the English had taken refuge in some way. But it was probably done also in part to really knock people out. I don't know whether it's right. It's just an intuition. I don't have any evidence for this, but the idea was really annoying these guys by making them rain cannonballs on their ranks and smashing them. So it's perfectly plausible that at this point you don't have what to do. You don't know what to do. You have these two cannons. You want to use them to hit them and see what happens, to cause some loss. It's also very meaningful, in my opinion, that the two French guns that are taken back, that they're stolen by the English, are recovered eventually and regained by the French through the intervention of men-at-arms. This is particularly interesting because it still reveals the substantial strength and versatility of men-at-arms, especially in this particular context of European warfare, that are basically the factotum of the battlefield. Like these were jacks of all trades that could really operate in every possible situation. There were still heavy troops, and obviously they had, in the sense, these problems relatively in mobility, not much as individual fighters. That naturally it took a heavy toll to fight in full plate armor, but especially as a unit that obviously was slower and heavier. But that's what you want to do when there is a fight that is being engaged by mostly medium and even light troops, and you send these men-at-arms in, and they can really represent this critical mass that solves the problem. Still, particularly effective element to engage into battle. That's kind of your elite, right? So that's what you want to do. What is interesting in this battle is also the use of horse archers, especially the Breton ones, that were seemingly instrumental to seize the bridge past so the river crossing from the English reserve that had been placed in there effectively to protect it. So this naturally could be easy, considering that Richmond's army was mostly mounted and had this both heavy cavalry and horse archers together with them. And another very interesting thing is the dismounted archers that are sent as a guard to gather the men-at-arms and other artillerymen, say gunmen alongside the cannons. This reveals that at this point the Franks archers, are the free archers, as we're called, were employed also by the French, so that they could have this, in spite of guarding gunners and artillery, they still needed archers to defend, say, guns. So this is still a phase in military history where when armies like longbows and crossbows are pretty much effective even over firearms, especially handguns. And other things I don't really know. I think there are several other interesting aspects, but they're related to the development of the battle in itself. And for now, I will just stop it here. Let me see if there is something else that I missed along the way. Naturally, as we were saying before, I've read several different versions. For instance, I read a French version that was kind of neglecting the initial fight between the French of Clermont and the English. I mean, the battle for the guns, let's say, along the stream and over the bridge. So it was kind of surprising, because that's an interesting aspect of the story. Talking about the relation cavalry-infantry,
is there evidence in this battle of some prevalence, etc.? Well, I don't really know, because French and Breton cavalry here, it's definitely makes this charge that seemingly had the greatest effect in routing the English. But I think the English at this point were, in fact, in the mess that we have described. They were disorganized, they were scared, and they were not in an optimal situation. So we don't really know whether the French cavalry did, but definitely the hesitation of the French to launch the full-scale attack probably reveals the fear the still French cavalry had towards the English foot armies at this point, so that they weren't taking it lightheartedly. This is a battle where you don't find, in fact, any hint that of this usual. It's a bit atypical, because you don't find the usual fight, the usual frontal attack that is halted. You find that the whole situation was resolved simply by these two systems kind of shattering until the weaker one attacked, because it was attacked from both from double side, kind of crumbles, right? And so there is no real measure to say, okay, this is the kind of traditional English foot formation, or the traditional French cavalry formation that really made it won. I've read, by the way, this is something perhaps I forgot to tell, is that when Clermont attacked initially, he sent there are certain reconstructions of the battles, at least that say that there had been certain attacks that were repelled before the gunning of the intervention of French artillery. That seemed to me as somewhat I don't really know whether, because I didn't check the source, because the sources are many. So when I'm making this would take months to effectively study, and I propose it to you just in this way. But I found it a bit strange in the sense that one thing is, the world battle seems to be surrounded by this incapability of recognizing or of acknowledging the enemy forces. So that source was saying that book was saying, actually, this was, I don't remember, it was Jan Heath. No, I don't remember who he was. I forgot it because I read it today, but I don't have it now. And it was saying that the French, before gunning the English with the culverins, had made an attack of 3 lines of footmen at arms, and that were repelled. I also read that there were seemingly some French assaults, cavalry assault from Clermont army onto the English flanks in the same moment. So there is also this other perspective I kind of skipped a little, that because I forgot that, but I don't think it's so. I should really the sources one day. Perhaps we can do it. But I will tell you that there was this kind of, testing the enemy formation a little bit, because what you really, it's really important to tell was there. I don't really know. We have to go there, find out, and these ideas are they're fascinating, they're captivating, but we don't have any certainty about it, because when I thought especially about those cavalry attacks on the flanks, it seemed that they were definitely aimed at trying to effectively outflank the enemy, of course, but but especially being predisposing for an attack in some way, so that when you outflank an enemy you can attack him with your main force, and harassing him from the side, it should crumble. So I don't know here what Clermont was doing too. Instead, this other version of the story we gave obviously saw Clermont a bit more cautious and kind of wise, and listening what the best advice, and it's possible that there was some other, in fact, testing of the English army for Clermont, that however didn't quite turn out well. So we can imagine way more actions than that. But all versions, however, report this, or at least there is this consensus on the attack for, the battle for the gun that had somewhat lighten up the fight a bit more on the wall line. So it was probably more intense than we can see, but at this point it's if there really was this almost full engagement that we didn't see on Clermont's side, what about the traditional tactics of the English? Like, what about this longbow fire that was so dreaded, and that was definitely worth to stop, beyond the range of which was the really informed the line, the distance at which you wanted to stay from these archers. So it's kind of interesting from this side. I was thinking about something now. I don't remember. Oh yes, that even Gauff's detachment on the left was somewhat isolated. That also played somewhat a part in the story, because that was apparently done to protect the river fording at that very place, and at the same time providing the rest of the army a kind of solid defensive position on the right. So it's but also in here we don't have enough knowledge of how the whole army was actually deployed. Not only that, which is true, but also what really the places were at the time. Like, where were the villages, where were the fordings, etc. So it's I mean, the correct position is, unfortunately, this happens in many battles. There was even a little fortress seemingly laying at the northeast of the English position between Aignarville and Formigny. This also was probably presided, and we also don't know. It seems that Richmond's cavalry at one point not just advanced against the English en masse, but also had sent some detachments in, in the rear of the English army towards Formigny to block certain passages on the river, on the fortress, or on the fording. So that's a tactics that is carried out. I was studying it today just for another battle of the 14th century, that you block basically the ways of the routes of escape. And this would explain, by the way, why so many Englishmen were killed in this action, among the other things, and also why, in fact, they were bottled up in this thing, and why some of them also exist, because probably they were literally blocked and surrounded in some way, and then they took refuge in some places because they probably couldn't run away. Some managed, but seemingly not so many. So you realize, I think this is an interesting, and now I will explain to you how these battles are. I can't think of anything else at this very moment, but whatever. We've seen the role of artillery in the way that I don't have much else to say. You could talk endlessly about these battles, but they're still kind of problematic to assess. Now, and even the maps I've used in here makes you understand how how different interpretations of this battle can be. I mean, more or less, you can understand what's this about, but still, it's not so clear how the thing developed. However, these are battles that I now began to discuss on Schwerpunkt and made a playlist dedicated exclusively to battles, and these are tactical stories And they are, I mean, some of them I know the sources actually, the actual sources, and I can tell you a story. Most of the times I just read these things from studies, so that I don't really read the whole sources, and therefore I just read the story from some of the best literature available, and I kind of explain the battle, and naturally I try to apply my own kind of military logic, but you have no idea how difficult it is to make the story clear, because even one different interpretation can make you lean from a completely different towards a completely different direction. So you have to use a bit of logic in here, and it's not easy when you don't have the actual sources, because it's only by studying them, and I don't have time to do it. I mean, really, I have other things to do, but this, what I mean is that I would love to do it actually, but it would take effectively weeks, even just to prepare one video and to study, to find the sources, to read them, to study them, to translate them effectively. To know whether until the very last thing it's been written on them. So this is a thing that could last. I mean, a battle like this you could even write a bachelor thesis about it. So it would require an enormous lot of time. But I try to tell the essentials so that you can form at least an idea of how difficult and how varied the interpretation of these battles are. So it's and the story, however, in this I know it even without reading the sources, because I read what it's been written about the sources, etc., is that effectively we don't know most of how it really happened. So that's why that's what I would like to transmit to you. Maybe one day I will make a video dedicated to this. That is how the more you study battles, especially from this time, but from all times in general, the problem you have is that you don't have the solution of these battles. You can't say the battle effectively went this way, and I'm sure of that. You can't, because you effectively don't know. If you find a source that claims something that is not necessarily diametrically opposed, but it basically brings in aspects that are partly incongruent with the picture that another sources represents, well, of course you can't say, I don't know, maybe that source is less reliable because of some reason, and therefore you have to you have to study the history of the source, etc. But sometimes, and it happens very often, especially for these battles that start to be well documented, you have so many different accounts that you can't reconcile together. So there is no positivistic understanding of these stories. You can't really say how it's gone because we don't really know. And what is interesting is that even the sources and maybe even eyewitnesses, etc., didn't understand either. Do you think that, I don't know, I don't know if you ever studied the Battle of Agincourt in itself. Do you think that we actually know how that battle went? And do you think we actually know today? Of course we don't know. Because the same sources that wrote about the battle didn't know how it actually had gone. Especially a battle like that was pretty larger than this. Because we have no idea. And even those who were on the field that were not in charge of the situation, they couldn't really grasp the whole thing. This is also what von Clausewitz says, and it is normal in military history that most of the times when a battle is finished, you don't actually know how it's gone, even if you know the result. You can't tell it was this factor that was the decisive one. There are several determining factors and no way to measure them. And sometimes certain factors that are not even certain, especially at this time in history, that is like, you realize how far from any positive approach of these sources we can go. So most of these battles are eventually reconstructed on the basis of these climatic events that are reported by most sources in different ways, but still with some degree of homogeneity, and you can say, well, okay, more or less the battle went like that, but you can't really tell how it was. Okay, so I would like to leave you with this reflection, because it's something I confrontate myself with every day, every time I study, and these sources, especially the reconstruction of battles, and you can say, well, what the hell? We don't really know how it's gone. And you have to be content that at least we know what we know, because there are battles about which we effectively know almost nothing. So these are all battles that these are at least battles that we can study with a certain degree of understanding of. But it ends here. So this was the Battle of Formigny, and I hope for now I stop here. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you are interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.